I guess.
Go on. At that time in the evening on Saturday evenings, nothing else. Sometimes we do turn on one.
Sure.
You told me I was a teenager, I would do that.
All right, I think we're going.
All right. Good morning, everyone, on this last Sunday of the year. In the Gospel of Luke chapter 9. So if you haven't opened there, let's turn to Luke chapter 9. Unfortunately, as is often the case, we had to kind of leave in the midst of something. So let's just quickly think back, at least over this chapter. At the beginning of the chapter, Jesus sent the 12 out, and they changed from being disciples, simply followers, learners, to being apostles, those that were the sent ones. And they went up preaching the gospel wherever they went in Galilee. We saw the question that came to Herod Antipas, of who this person was that was being preached about throughout Galilee. And of course, the apostles returned. Then we had the feeding of the 5,000, that grand miracle where Jesus multiplied the 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed probably 10 to 20,000 people when you get down to everyone who was there. Then we have that most crucial moment when the question of Jesus' identity comes up again, only this time Jesus brings it up and asking the disciples, who do people say that I am? And finally, Peter answered and said, you are the Christ of God, the Messiah of God. Now, we're at that point. Peter's just made that proclamation. And if you will, that's I'm not sure if exactly fits as a climax in the book, but from there on, it continues in a little bit different direction, but it certainly is a key time in the Gospel of Luke, a key verse. And we would expect, well, let me ask you, what would you expect? Now, don't look ahead if you haven't already. What would you expect to have happen after Peter makes this proclamation? Jesus says, who do people say I am? Who do you say I am? You're the Messiah of God. Boom. You got it. Now what? What would you expect?
Give him a gold star.
Gold star.
Right.
Put it right on his forehead. And then what would you expect Jesus to say?
Tell everyone.
Now go tell everyone. Now you've been out doing miracles, proclaiming the gospel. Now you have come to, if they hadn't before, they certainly come to now, the realization of who he is, that he is God in flesh. He is the Messiah of God. So now you've got a further piece of the puzzle. Go out and tell everybody. That's what we would expect. So often Jesus doesn't do what I expect, either then or now. And so we have, as we come to the section before us, looking at verses 21 through 27 in Luke's gospel, this a brief prediction of what is going to be coming. And it starts out with, but he warned them and instructed them not to tell this to anyone. Exactly the opposite of what we would think. This word warn, I tried to do some study on it, and I'm a little confused as to how the idea of warning or admonishing comes out of it, because the normal meaning is to honor or to award somebody. And it would seem warning them is kind of the opposite of that, but it is used that way a number of places, but it's the fourth meaning down. So I thought maybe I would gain some insight into more than just the word warn, but nothing arrived in my brain anyway. So he basically is admonishing them, and then it says he instructed them. Now, the normal word for instruct or to teach is not what's used here. Interesting word he uses. He uses the word para-angelo, which is the word angelos, which you recognize as angel. So the word angel means messenger. So angeleo, the verb means to give a message. With para beside it, para generally means beside. And so it's as if, he's warning, admonishing them, but he's coming alongside of them in a sense to give them a message. Okay, here's the message that I have for you. Don't tell anybody. It's our secret. Now, not long before, the apostles have been covering the countryside, proclaiming that the king had come and the kingdom was about to be established. Multitudes of people have been gathering to see and hear Jesus. It must have appeared to the disciples that the popularity of Jesus was growing and that soon he would begin making moves to bring his kingdom to fruition. And now we have the key element. He is the Messiah. It had to have been astonishing for them to hear that they were to terminate their efforts. Just when things were moving along so well, moving ahead. Someone has said, it had been necessary for Jesus to cease using the word Messiah about himself because of the political meaning to the Jews. Frederick Godet observes, they were to keep from proclaiming him openly as the Christ on account of the contradiction between the hopes which this title had awakened in the minds of the people and the way in which this office was to be realized in him. We get more information about that in the Gospel of John, where we find after the feeding of the 5,000 that they actually try to force him to become king. And so that apparently is the main reason behind Jesus saying, don't tell anybody. Because there's a certain progress that needs to take place. There's a certain, as we're going to see in the next couple of verses, there's a certain design. And Jesus really doesn't want the ball, which soon would begin rolling down the hill toward Calvary, not to be pushed too soon. Any comments or questions about that before we go on to the rest of what he says?
It would have been nice to have seen dialogue there of what the disciples said after he said.
Yeah.
That, to command them to not tell. Like why?
But then again, Jesus kind of answers that as we go on to
True.
what he says next. So we'll use that as a segue. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes. First, let's consider again the Son of Man. As I've mentioned before, this is the most often used term that Jesus uses to describe himself, Son of Man, which has two implications. Let's see if we remember what they are. What are the implications of Jesus using the expression Son of Man? What does it communicate when he calls himself Son of Man?
He became a man.
That he is human. So he's not, as some of the Gnostics later would say, and other aberrant Christian organizations, that he was not truly human. He just appeared human. No, he was human. He's the Son of Man. What's the other implication from that specific term, Son of Man. Or maybe not implication, maybe it's a direct connection, put it that way. With what is Jesus connecting himself when he uses the name Son of Man?
Son of God.
Okay, how is the son of how is that indicating Son of God? Because it would seem to be the opposite. Son of Man is not the Son of God.
He's both.
But how does this name indicate that?
Wasn't a name used Old Testament? But I can't remember the exact reference.
Yeah. Daniel 7.
Dang.
Daniel uses the name Son of Man to refer to the Messiah. And if you read Daniel, when he uses that, the indications there are also that the Son of Man is divine. So it goes to John's point. So the Son of Man is a name that indicates a human, but on the other hand, it is a title for the divine Messiah. Maybe just to refresh our memories, we should go back and look at that just real quickly. Daniel chapter 7, right after Ezekiel, Daniel, before all the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, all that. Daniel 7. Verses 13 and 14. Would someone like to read that for us? Okay.
I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven, he came to the Ancient of Days, and he brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed.
All right, see, we begin with the Son of Man coming up to the Ancient of Days, but then what happens next from what Daniel says? What indications are there that this Son of Man is actually God?
Everlasting dominion.
Everlasting dominion. How can that be said of anyone but God? Okay, what else?
His kingdom will not be destroyed.
Right. What else?
Shall not be.
Looks like we're working backward through the text. What else? Yeah. The whole world is going to serve him.
It's given. So
Yeah, he's given authority over, as it turns out, the whole world, glory, and a kingdom. So when Jesus calls himself Son of Man, we ought to remember this every time. Remember what it is that Jesus is actually saying about himself.
I heard a guy say that because we interpret it, he said, Son of Man actually means, when he's using that, means he's divine. Son of God actually means, was used at their time to mean that you were part of humanity. And so we look at, from our perspective, we look at Son of Man being part of humanity and Son of God being part of divinity. Jesus' perspective in that day to the Jewish people, Son of Man meant he was divinity, and Son of God meant he was humanity. And so when you go back into the Hebrew, you go back into Psalms and see how they talk about different sons of God, you know, applying it to a whole bunch of people, but Son of Man is only applied to the divine one.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, and the religious leaders seem to understand that.
and the people, I think, started to
And
anyway.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
any other comments? All right, there's another word here that I want you to understand the full impact, and it's the word must. At least it says in my translation, it says the Son of Man must suffer. Is there any other words used in translations you have? Besides must? No, okay. It's one Greek word in, which is the word day, DEI, which means it is necessary. I know the word must means that, I suppose, but in my mind, to say that something must happen and saying it is necessary, it seems to me that it is necessary has a little bit stronger connotation. Maybe that's just me. But certainly we ought to understand that what he's saying here about what's going to happen is not just a prediction in a sense, or anything else, but saying that it is necessary. It's necessary for these things to happen. In other words, it's not just a possibility. It was necessary. Why? Because it was the plan of God foretold in the Old Testament, which encompasses everything that follows, which we're going to look at. But before we look at it, I want us to look at the Old Testament, really some of the Old Testament prophecies concerning Messiah, to see why Jesus says what I'm going to tell you is about to happen is necessary. Okay, so let's first turn to Isaiah chapter 52. Familiar passage to us, I'm sure. Beginning with verse 13, and it's always, every time you hear somebody talk about this, you probably hear them say the same thing. It's unfortunate that they divided the chapter where they did here. It really should begin with verse 13 of chapter 52, and then run through verse 12 of 53. Let's take, because it's a long passage, let's take turns on this. 13 through 15 of 52, we'll take that, right? Okay, 1 through 3 of 53, James. 4 through 6, Monty. 7 through 9, Barb, and 10 through 12. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay, let's begin.
Behold, my servant shall act wisely, he shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So shall he sprinkle many nations, kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them they see, and that which they have not heard they understand.
Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not.
Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all.
He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearing was silent. So he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. Then they made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth.
But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. He would render himself as a guilt offering He will see his offspring. He will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many, as he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will allot him a portion with the great, and he will divide the booty with the strong. Because he poured out himself to death and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he himself bore the sin of many and interceded for the transgressors.
I hope that as you heard this being read, that you noticed things that are fulfilled in the suffering of Jesus. And also noticed things that indicate his divinity. You know, if he's suffering, then he's obviously human, but there are indications of his divinity throughout that passage as well. Another key place is Psalm 22. Anybody know what's in Psalm 22? One of those very important chapters in the Bible, especially if you are witnessing to somebody, and particularly if they are of Hebrew descent. Certainly the last passage is really key. But this one is too, because it predicts accurately crucifixion hundreds of years before it was invented. So we'll divide up again, verses 1 through 5. Verses 6 to 8, 9 and 10, 11 to 18, 19 to 21, 22 to 24, 25 to 31. All right, Psalm 22. For the choir director, upon Igeleth Hash-Shabar, a psalm of David.
my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear, and in the night season, and am not silent. 2:5, right?
Mhm.
But you are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted and you delivered them. They cried to you and were delivered. They trusted in you and were not ashamed.
But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised by the people. All they who see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, he trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Yet let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him.
Yet you are he who took me from the womb. You made me trust you at my mother's breast. On you was I cast from my birth, and from my mother's womb you have been my God.
Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help. Many bulls encompass me, strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, and is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd.
Potsherd.
Said it
Potsherd.
one more time.
Potsherd.
Potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death, where dogs encompass me. A company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots.
But you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the enemy. Save me from the mouth of the lion. You can rescue me from the horns of the wild fox.
I will tell your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him and stand in awe of him. All you offspring of Israel. For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when we cried to him.
From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will perform before those who fear him. The afflicted shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before you. For kingship belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the prosperous of the earth eat and worship. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust, even the one who could not keep himself alive. Posterity shall serve him. It shall be told of the Lord to the coming generation. They shall come and proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, that he has done it.
These things are also indicated in the New Testament. There are plenty more Old Testament passages we could look at, but let's turn over to 1 Peter chapter 1. Verses 17 to 21. 1 Peter 1, 17 to 21. If you address as Father the one who impartially judges according to each one's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your stay on earth, knowing that you are not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. For he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has appeared in these last times for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. So what Jesus suffered was something that was foreknown, not only as something that the prophets were given from time to time in the Old Testament, but before the foundation of the world. Prior to God creating the world, these things were set as what was going to occur, according to what Peter tells us there. Peter relates much the same thing back in Acts chapter 2. What's in Acts 2? One of those chapters that all Christians should know where to turn for this. Acts 2, beginning with verse 22. This is Peter's sermon on the day of Pentecost. Peter says, verse 22, men of Israel, listen to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs, which God performed through him in your midst, just as you yourselves know. This man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. Did you notice that? It was something that was determined, predetermined by God. But they're still responsible because they did the dirty deed. But God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. And then he goes on to reflect on what David says in Psalm about the resurrection. And we won't go into all that, but the resurrection is predicted there in that passage of scripture. We'll just go down to verse 30. And so because he was a prophet, talking about David, and knew that God had sworn to him with an oath to seat one of his descendants on his throne, he looked ahead and spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, that he was neither abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh suffer decay. This Jesus, what Jesus? This Jesus who is the Messiah, God raised up again, to which we are all witnesses. And then it talks about him being exalted to the right hand of God, the ascension there. And then finally, let's listen to Bonnie read Revelation 13:8.
Revelation 13:8. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world.
All right, the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. I chose Bonnie because this is one time when I like what the King James, how they translate it than the more modern translations, which translate this differently. I'm not sure why. I looked into Greek and it seems, I guess it could go either way, but anyway, it's certainly clear from the other passage that we read in Acts 2 that this was something determined by God before creation. Now, to consider that what Jesus is proposing here is a necessity. We look at that and we think of what God determined would occur. But what also ought to occur to our minds is why? Why was it necessary? Jesus said it's necessary. Not just because it was predicted, but it was also necessary for another reason. What is the big reason as to why it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and die and be resurrected?
Blood must be shed.
Yeah.
Or blood must be
Make
shed.
a perfect sacrifice.
Right.
Substitutionary.
Which goes back to our sin. There must be a sacrifice for sin. There must be atonement. There must be a substitute, or no one would ever have fellowship with God. And he created man to have fellowship with him. That would never occur if there is no passion. What a shocking reflection on human sin, one commentator said, to consider that this was a necessity. Mark 10:45 says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." 2 Corinthians 5:21, the Apostle Paul writes, "For our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." Next time we'll look at what specifically must occur to the Messiah to accomplish not only the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, but more importantly, to accomplish our redemption. We'll do that next time.